The Pelicans lost to the Utah Jazz again, but don't overthink it. I'll tell you the one reason why the Pels lost this game. The good news, a fix should be returning this week. It's Tuesday's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans and NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NolaJake on Twitter. Here with y'all on this Tuesday, day after the Pelicans fall to the Utah Jazz again, this time 114-112. Full complement of guys we were expecting to see. Zion played, Brandon Ingram played, and they still lost. Why? There's one answer to this. There is one answer which killed the Pelicans in this game, and I will explain in today's show. And the good news is a fix is returning. That's an intentional word choice right there. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. If you want to support the channel, become an everydayer. Listen Monday through Friday to the show. Or if you listen one day a week, listen two. Or become an every shower. Maybe you don't listen every day, but you catch up. Met a couple y'all at Mid-City Yacht Club who told me just that. I like that term as well, but you count as everydayers in my book. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. It's $150 if your team wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. So let's get into this one. This game was so simple to diagnose and talk about, and it just makes the show flow so well. 114-112 loss to the Utah Jazz. Here's where this game was won and lost. It has not as much to do with Zion or Brandon Ingram, and it's the three-point shooting. The Pelicans, 32% from three on 7 of 22 shooting. They took just 22 three-point attempts. They were second, third worst in the league last year at 30. They shot 8 fewer in this game. The Utah Jazz, by comparison, didn't shoot amazing from three, but they were 17 for 48, 35%, 5% difference right there, whatever. But there were 10 more made threes. That is a 30-point differential in terms of three-pointers in terms of points. I said that poorly, but you get what I'm trying to say. That's 30 points. They lost by 2. That's what happened in this game. That's why they lost this game, was the lack of three-point shooting. We'll talk about CJ McCollum and his return, and a lot has been made, and we've talked about this if you're an everydayer on the show. He needs to be in the starting lineup, and this game just really punctuates that point. If you are an everydayer, when I talked about some of the games against the second game against the Sacramento Kings, the game the other night that they won against the Los Angeles Clippers, both those teams got back into this by shooting three-pointers when the Pelicans got cold. Because in this starting lineup, which admittedly has been good in terms of numbers, Dyson Daniels, Herb Jones, Brandon Ingram, Zion Williamson, Jonas Valanciunas, name the shooter. I'm pausing for dramatic effect, but it's a rhetorical question. There isn't one. Name the shooter that's playing outside of Jordan Hawkins on this team of guys that played in this game. You just heard the starters. Najee Marshall, Jordan Hawkins, Cody Zeller, Jose Alvarado, Larry Nance Jr. got minutes. Who's the shooter? Hawkins is. He went 3 of 6 in this game. That was good. Najee of the subs was the only other player that took threes. He went 1 of 3. That's not going to get it done. They need more three-point shooting because what the Utah Jazz did in this game was the very simple, in the terms of Stan Van Gundy, build an effing wall around the rim. They just parked guys at the rim and said, Zion, you're not going to beat us by going to the rim and scoring. And they limited Zion as best they could. 26 points on 16 shots is actually very, very good. No turnovers for him either. He had an incredible game. But he was going to need to score 40 in this. To get 26 points on 16 shot attempts, 7 of 9 from the free throw line, 7 assists, 0 turnovers is an incredible Zion game, and the team wasted it because they couldn't make the Utah Jazz pay. One of the things that I've been saying for multiple years now, right, is you don't get three-point shooting to really space the court for Zion Williamson. With the way he scores at the rim historically at around a 70% rate, that's the equivalent of like a 45% shooter from three, a 50% shooter from three. Those don't exist, particularly in the NBA in high volume. You need three-point shooters to make the opponent pay for doubling and triple teaming or just building a wall around the rim when it comes to Zion Williamson. And the Utah Jazz did that. They dared anybody else to beat them. They said, Zion, you're not going to score at the rim. We're going to put 3 people there. So Zion would kick it out to Dyson Daniels. Dyson went 0 for 4 from 3. Herb Jones did okay, 2 of 5 from 3. But when those starters are out there, they're not taking enough three-point shots, and it allows teams, the Jazz, well-coached team, to just wall off the rim. Okay, if Dyson goes off and goes 5 of 7 from 3 or like 7 of 10 from 3, and the Utah Jazz lose, they're going to go, okay, we still executed the right game plan, and an outlier reason is the reason we lost this game. But it didn't happen. Those guys were tentative. They didn't shoot, right? There aren't shooters here. Essentially, to sum it up, the Pelicans could not make the Utah Jazz pay for their defensive strategy. It worked. It's why the Pels lost this game. Full stop. It's as simple as that. It's as simple as that. We'll talk about the defense in the third segment of today's show. It wasn't good. Really simple stuff from the Utah Jazz that beat the Pelicans. But you need more shooting, right? You don't have CJ McCollum right now. You don't have Trey Murphy. You don't even have Matt Ryan. If you have Matt Ryan in both of these games, they probably look dramatically different. If you have Matt Ryan in this game, a guy on a 2-way contract, you win this game. I feel very confident in saying that. That's wild. You just need more shooting. If anything, this has shown you these past 2 games, right? B.I. had a subpar fourth quarter because there was no spacing for him to be able to get to the rim, where he's done a very good job this season because they walled it off. It beat the Pelicans the other night when it was Brandon Ingram's turn to carry it, and it beat the Pelicans on Monday night when it was Zion's turn. You know, it's kind of punctuated by the final play. 10.7 seconds left. The Pelicans inbound the ball, and they get it to Zion, the guy you want. And he drives, and there's nothing there. 3 defenders at the rim, and he shouldn't shoot that shot. He was smart to pass out of it. And then it just all fell apart from there, right? That final shot where they just walled him off and everything fell apart because they don't have the people to kind of fix that. You saw some weird lineups here. You know, in the fourth quarter, maybe they should have had Hawkins and Zion on the court more together, and they didn't. Those are the type of things. The lack of shooting here cost the team the win. It's truly as simple as that. That's what this was. We don't need to overthink it. You know, when I do these segments, when I do recap shows, it's what's the one big takeaway I want you as a fan of this team, as a listener of the show to have. It's this. They need more three-point shooting, and it's going to cost you in games. I said it almost cost them against the Kings. It almost cost them against the Clippers. It cost them tonight in a game that they should have won. Disappointing loss for the Pelicans here because of all of that. They need to make sure they get shooters around Zion Williamson that are going to make the opponent pay. Not to space the court. Say it with me once more with feeling, right? To make the opponent pay. Coming up next, though, hey, we're getting some good injury news for the Pelicans. CJ McCollum close to returning. I'll give you an update on that and how they should use him going forward because it's not as a 6-man off the bench. I'll explain. But he also will be a 6-man. I'll explain. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Right now, though, I'm excited to tell you about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. As the weather gets colder, the NFL offers stay hot on FanDuel because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins, or if you're betting against the Saints with how terrible they looked against the Atlanta Falcons, your team loses. Bet against the Saints. You got a very good chance of winning that money line bet when you take their opponent. So if you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is super easy to use, and it makes it easy to find a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, the same game parlays where you can turn your bet into a bunch more money with a bigger payout. And again, if the Saints are going to be terrible, bet against them and at least make some money off of it. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get in on the action this NFL season, this NBA season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL and the official sportsbook of Locked On. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We are here Monday through Friday, the number one Pelicans podcast, breaking down everything you want to know about this team, the good, the bad in today's show. The injury news, trade targets, we cover it all here. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube as well. If you want to support the channel, become an everydayer. 2 words. Listen Monday through Friday because we are here, cover it all as part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. For your second listen, go check out Locked On Saints. Ross Jackson breaking down everything black and gold, one of my favorite people in the world. Saints are frustrating. He's making me feel just a little bit better about there. There are some positives, and he is covering them there over at the Locked On Saints podcast. So let's get back into the Pelicans here. As I said, 3-point shooting is the reason they lost this game. Like, that's the reason they lost this game. It was a 30-point differential in terms of 3-point shooting. The Pelicans, you make one more three, shoot above 30%, you can win this game. Really as simple as that. You know who's good at shooting threes? Who's been very good this season? It's CJ McCollum. If you're an everydayer, I've talked a lot about the starting lineup of Dyson, Herb, B.I., Zion, Valanciunas. I did a deep dive into the numbers. I said the one thing they don't do is shoot threes. And at the time when I recorded that, they hadn't taken one of the corner threes, one shot from the short corner. The spacing was bad, and they were beating teams through really good ball movement and just elevated play from Zion and B.I., but then you go against a well-coached team, and boom, done, you lose. They need more three-point shooting. CJ McCollum is taking over 8 3-point attempts per game. That's very high volume. He's shooting 38% from 3. He's making 3.2 made threes per game. That's good shooting. CJ McCollum this season averaging 22 points per game and almost 6 assists, along with 5 rebounds, which is about a rebound less than Zion. Put that in context. Is the guy you need out there. So all of the talk of when he's healthy, he should be the 6th man off the bench and all of those things, no, he should not be. The good news is from the punctured, partially collapsed lung, whatever they're calling it, he's expected to make his return this week, either Wednesday against the Philadelphia 76ers or Friday against the San Antonio Spurs. By the way, that Friday game, I am super excited to be in the Smoothie King Center to watch Victor Wembanyama play. Spurs, like generational rookie that I can't wait to see in person. So one of those 2 games he's going to make his return. Look, I'd rather it be Wednesday, get him back in, play him limited minutes, than unleash him Friday to make sure you get that win against the San Antonio Spurs. Because if they lose that game, we are going to do an angry cast right after because things went real wrong if that was the case. So you need his shooting in the starting lineup. You need to make teams pay. How useful would he have been on that final possession as an outlet? At the end of the game, let me ask you this. You're an opposing head coach. Who are you more worried about, Dyson Daniels or CJ McCollum? Don't worry about starting the game, but at the end of the game, who are you more concerned about, Dyson Daniels or CJ McCollum? If you say Dyson Daniels, you're lying, and you shouldn't be a head coach. It's absolutely Christian James McCollum right here. That tells you all you need to know that he should be starting. That he should be getting those significant minutes and getting run with the starters. The good news with that is he also can lead the second unit. You know, one of the questions I get asked a lot, and this actually came up with a couple people at the watch party with the Pels 12 at Mid-City Yacht Club on Saturday. You know, and they said, should he come off the bench and lead the second unit? How often does any team, let alone the Pelicans with 3 stars, run like a complete 5-man bench unit out there on the court in like competitive minutes? You don't do that. It's called a rotation, not a lineup change, right? This isn't hockey. You run multiple guys and multiple lineup combinations, and you rotate through players. So you can have CJ McCollum out there with Jonas Valanciunas and then 3 bench players. They've done this a bunch this year, and that lineup, CJ, the shooters lineup, it was called essentially, was good. They came back against the Oklahoma City Thunder. It was a game where I had the hotel difficulties and had to record the next day. So That lineup works. It won them the game. That was basically CJ and a bunch of bench players. You could put Larry Nance Jr. in there. You could put, Cody Zeller in there instead of Jonas Valanciunas. But it was CJ and bench players. That lineup can work. You can still do that while also giving him run with the starters. He could be your first sub out. That's how you get this done. That's how you get the best of both worlds. That's why CJ McCollum absolutely needs to be starting and closing games for this team. And no, not Dyson Daniels. I'm glad that Dyson has gotten this experience, that he's played well. But the offense is lacking, and it cost them in this game. You can't have a starter go 1 of 6. They need him to be making those shots. He didn't in this game. He's been a little bit up and down when it comes to the three-point shooting this year. From 3 this year, he's shooting, this is before this game, so this is going to go down. 27.3%. No. I'd rather have CJ at 38% on over 8 attempts per game. Still let him run the second unit, thread him in and out of the right kind of lineups, and that's the way to do this. Truly, that is the way to do this. And I think that's how you get the best of both worlds while starting him. They need it. They also need his playmaking, right? He's proven that he makes good decisions, that he isn't going to turn the ball over at a high rate, especially when he's kind of playing in this more natural off-ball role. The defense has been good overall, even with him in there. Dyson certainly has done an excellent job there. But here's the other thing, and this is going to tie into the next segment, right? When you looked at this game and you watched what the Utah Jazz were doing, their offense wasn't complex. It was pretty straightforward, pretty easy. Nothing too exciting. They were just making terrible defensive miscues and getting beat by simple actions. If that's going to happen, go all out on offense. Dyson didn't stop that, right? The starting lineup here with Dyson and Herb didn't start that. We'll get into more of the specifics around why. There are reasons. But if they're not going to actually get stops and let you get out in the fast break and run in transition, then those aren't the type of guys that you need. You need guys that are going to score and help you win the game, because if you're putting defensive guys out there and they're not getting defensive stops, okay. Pelicans had 14 fast break points in this one. Utah Jazz had 19. Kind of tells you all you need to know when it comes to this. The Utah Jazz had just 10 turnovers. Pelicans also only had 8, and they still lost this game, which is such a waste. Just a disappointing loss. They need to, I do think it's health, right? When you look at it in terms of the shooting from what we talked about in the first segment, when I told you this lineup wasn't necessarily as good as we thought it was going to be because of the three-point shooting issues and some of the other half-court issues that were being masked, this is what happens. There's not really an answer to that right now until guys get healthy. That's the problem. Credit them for winning the games that they did and the inspired play at times that they've had. But you need CJ back. You need to get Trey Murphy back soon. And I do think Trey Murphy will come back soon. You need Matt Ryan, of all players, back, right? Those are the type of guys you need to really space the court more. You get more shooters out here. That's going to be a very big thing for the Pelicans. You can't have just 2 guys off the bench shooting threes and that's it. You can't get Zion. Of the 7 threes they made, Zion made 1. So remove that from the equation, right? They essentially had 6 made threes. BI took just 2. What are we doing here? What are we doing here? 22 3-point attempts and that's it? It's got to be better than that. CJ's going to help that. Still needs to play a very prominent role with the starters going forward. Let's talk about the defense, though, because there's a couple of things that have kind of come up and that I've noticed, and it's not great. Let's break that down coming up here next, today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Right now, though, I'm excited to tell you about PrizePicks. PrizePicks is daily fantasy sports made easy. And it's just you against the numbers. Instead of battling thousands of other players against pros, sharks, you pick more or less than the number projection on 2 to 6 players. Look at their stats, more or less than that, and then you watch the winnings roll in when you get it correct. And with basketball season and football season going on, you can have a combo projection across both sports. For example, take LeBron James plus Travis Kelce at a 10.5 combo of 3-pointers made and receptions. It's super simple. You know these players. You know what they're going to do, right? Zion to score more than 24.5 points. When CJ comes back to have more than 2.5 made threes in his first game. PrizePicks even offers a reboot policy so that your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. If you have a player who exits the game in the first half, doesn't return for the second, that player is rebooted. PrizePicks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy built right in. So if you want to play, go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. That's, again, free money right there, up to $100 in a first-time deposit match when you go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use code LockedOnNBA. PrizePicks, it's daily fantasy sports made easy. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen. Today and every day, we are here Monday through Friday, the number one Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Become an everyday. Listen Monday through Friday. Support the show. Comment down below on YouTube. Do you agree that three-point shooting is the number one reason why they lost this game? Was it the defense? Was it something else? Some of y'all are going to say Willie Green. Fair, maybe not fair. Also, for your second listen, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows, which I do on Wednesday. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. All right, let's wrap up talking about the Pelicans' 114-112 loss to the Utah Jazz. Just disappointing, right? You have 8 total turnovers, a hyper-efficient game from Zion Williamson with no turnovers from him, and you shoot 7 of 22, really 6 of 21, 32% from 3. I said earlier if they shoot above 30%, they win. They did, they didn't. If they shoot 34% in this game, they win. Just an unbelievably disappointing game because of the three-point shooting. Like, I don't know what else they really could have done other than maybe force more turnovers and gotten out and run. But it just kind of wasn't that sort of night. The Pelicans have had trouble with Utah for years, playing on the road in some elevation. You're not on the second night of a back-to-back now. It's just kind of disappointing how it went for this team. The three-point shooting is why they lost. But a big reason why they lost was the defense was just... If you're watching me on YouTube, I look like a little exacerbated here because, it was bad. Zion was bad on defense in this one. Brandon Ingram was bad on defense in this one. Herb Jones had foul trouble in the first half, and that definitely impacted him in the second, right? Dyson wasn't able to make the impact that he wanted to on the defensive side of the ball here, right? Really, the only guy who was, given maximum effort there was Najee Marshall, who had 3 steals in this. But the Pelicans had 1 block in the game. They had just 5 steals. They weren't forcing turnovers, able to get out and run and play in transition. That masks poor shooting. When you get out and run in transition, it's the easiest, most efficient offense you can get. Well, if you're not doing that, you have to play in the half court, and then your lack of three-point shooting can come into play. And it very much did in this game. Credit the Utah Jazz for making their shots. That's a big part of it, certainly. Being smart with the ball, passing the ball around really well. But this was one for the Pels that you've got to find a way to just make that defensive impact and to get beat on very simple actions, very simple ball screens and things. Nothing that was that complex run by the Utah Jazz. And the Pels had no idea how many open corner three-point shooters from players you've never heard of before were made, right? That's not a good thing. You can't have that. Particularly in the fourth quarter when you've got to execute at the highest level, the Pelicans weren't doing it on the defensive side of the ball. That's really where they want their identity to be as well. And they weren't able to do that whatsoever. And if you're not going to get stops, then you need your shooters. So this is a game where they know they don't have those guys. You got to give that effort on the defensive side of the ball, and they just didn't. That's something that they need to take more pride in than they did in this game. This one really comes down to effort, awareness, and not letting, the game kind of getting away from you frustrate you in the way that it did. Again, I get why they lost this game. I get why they lost this game. You get why they lost this game. But if you maybe make a little bit more of a defensive effort, could it have changed? I don't actually know. I don't actually know, so don't hold me to that. But, You got to do something. And they didn't here. And this is the type of game that while it's understandable and we can make excuses for the losses, and I'm trying to explain it to you, also makes you wonder, like, is this team further away than we think? And we don't want to be thinking about that. We don't want to be thinking that about this team right now. They should be competitive. They've beaten some really good teams. And then they have moments like this, these 2 games, right? Where you're like, wait a second. What's truly going on here? Who are they truly? And that's something the Pelicans need to maybe ask themselves when it comes to the defensive side of the ball after a performance like this. That's where Willie Green wants their identity to be, for them to hang their hat. And to not get that in this game, very, very disappointing. Let me know what you think in the comments down below on YouTube. It's the number one reason they lost the game. 3-point shooting, defense, something else. How are you feeling about the team? Give me a 1 to 10 rating of your confidence in this team. 5 being like, I don't know. 1 being like, they're bad. 10 being like, win an NBA title. Where are you on that scale of 1 to 10 with your confidence level in this team? Let's do a little check-in with all y'all here. So that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Pelicans. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Become an everydayer. Listen and go check out the Locked On Sports Today 24/7 streaming national channel. It's a lot of fun. You'll see me on there. You also see me on Locked On NBA tomorrow as well. Got a chance to get another win at home. Spurs game on Friday. It's going to be a fun week here at Locked On Pelicans. Stay tuned. We're going to be coming to you like nobody else does. See y'all tomorrow.